Hi, everyone. Thank you so
Hello,
much for
hello.
joining us today. We're going to give a couple more seconds, 30 seconds for anyone joining. Perfect. All right, let's get started. Hi, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Alexa Campen, and I'm here today with Valet Wireless and Green4Good IT. So we are really excited to be hosting this learning series with Jim Martins from Green4Good IT on building a greener life cycle for mobile devices. Now, a few housekeeping rules. We do kindly ask that you remain muted and that any and all questions be asked in the chat. So any responses to unanswered questions will be sent out via email afterwards. Now, today's learning session is on something that a lot of organizations deal with, but don't necessarily always have a formal process for. And that is what happens to mobile devices as they age, break, get replaced, get returned, or sit unused. So, we're going to talk about how organizations can reduce waste through three major areas: repair, redeployment, and responsible end of life. And our goal today is to make this really, really practical for all of you. So by the end of today's session, you should all have a clearer understanding of how to look at your own mobile device fleet and ask, are we replacing devices too early? Are we recovering devices that we already own? Are we extending the life of devices where possible? And when a device really and truly reaches its end of life, are we handling it securely and responsibly? So today is going to be part education, part practical framework, and then also part opportunity to think differently about the devices that your organization already has. So before we jump in, I'll quickly introduce myself. I am Alexa Campen from Valet Wireless, and Valet is a managed cellular solutions provider. We help organizations handle the full life cycle of their mobile devices, from service activation and plan optimization to support, repairs, device refresh, redeployment, and lifecycle services. And I'm joined today by Jim Martins from Green4Good IT.
Thanks, Alexa. I'm extremely excited to be partnering with you on the webinar, and a huge thank you to all those watching at home or in office, either live or in the future. My name is Jim Martins, and I have the privilege of being an account executive for Green4Good IT Lifecycle Solutions, or Green4Good for short, supporting IT asset disposition activities for over 100 customers in both Canada and the US. Back to you.
Fantastic. So before we get started, I do have a quick question, and that is in the chat, please do let us know where you're tuning in from today. We usually have people joining from all across Canada, so we'd love to see where everyone is coming in from. You can drop your answer in the Q&A section as well. So we are hosting this session during Earth Month, and that timing is really intentional. When people think about Earth Month, the conversation often goes straight to recycling, planting trees, reducing paper, or larger corporate sustainability initiatives. Now, those things matter, but what we really want to talk about today is a very practical sustainability opportunity that already exists within most organizations. I do want to jump quickly back to the chat for a moment. I'm seeing people here from BC, some from Toronto, some from out west. So welcome everyone. Very, very excited to have all of you on. Thanks for tuning in. So, most organizations have mobile devices sitting somewhere. They may be in drawers, they could be in storage rooms, employee desks, field offices, branch locations, all over the place. Now, some of these devices are really active and useful, some are aging but still functional, and some have been labeled as broken. So, this is where sustainability can really become operational. A greener mobile strategy doesn't necessarily meaning adding a super complicated or new program. Sometimes it starts with asking better questions about the devices that you already have within your organization. So sustainability here is not separate from cost savings. In mobile, we find that those two things are very closely connected. If you're able to extend the useful life of a device or avoid an unnecessary purchase, or even recover a device that's currently sitting unused, that means you and the organization are both reducing waste and saving money all at the same time. So that is why we're hosting this learning session during Earth Month, and that's why it's the right time to have this conversation, because this is an area where organizations can make really practical and immediate changes. So why am I here from Valet Wireless talking to you about this? A little bit more about Valet Wireless is that we are the pioneers of managed cellular, and we have experience in reducing unnecessary device replacement, extending the useful life through reuse and redeployment, and then as well improving visibility across a mobile fleet and freeing IT teams from day-to-day cellular administration. So that's why we're here talking to you. If you're curious to learn more about Valet Wireless, I've got the QR code up on the screen, so you're more than welcome to scan that and have a look at our website and what we're all about. So I'll pass it off to Jim now to talk a little bit more about Green4Good IT.
Thank you. Yeah, a quick primer on who Green4Good is. So we specialize in secure, easy, and effective processing of end-of-first life technology. And really, in a nutshell, the core tenets of our business are to reduce or best case eliminate e-waste from organizations, unlock sustainability milestones via carbon credits, ensure secure disposition path for assets, streamline any asset disposition activities, and for the accountants in the room, maximize any trade-in revenue potential for the assets coming back. Very similar to Valet and Alexa. If you want to know more or a quick access to the website, please scan the QR code on the slide.
Fantastic. And resources will be passed on from both Valet and Green4Good after this learning series. So here we go. When we talk about building a greener life cycle, the first shift is a mindset shift. Most organizations currently treat mobility as kind of a one-time purchase. A device is ordered, it's then assigned to an employee, used for a certain period of time, which differs from organization to organization, and then is eventually replaced. But what happens in between each of those stages sometimes can end up being a little bit unclear. So what we find is that high-performing organizations think about devices a little bit differently, and they treat them as life cycle assets instead. So that means that devices are tracked and not forgotten, that aging devices are evaluated and not automatically replaced, and then return devices are reused, not stored indefinitely or discarded, and every single device has a really clear next step. So the most sustainable decision is not always buying a new device, and it's not always immediately recycling an old one. The most sustainable outcome is often making the right decision based on where that device is in its life. But without visibility and process, organizations end up making those decisions rather reactively, and that's where the waste and the unnecessary spend can really start to creep in. So the first step in building a greener device lifecycle is visibility. You really can't manage what you can't see. So visibility is all about getting a really clear look at how mobility is being dealt with in your organization and asking questions like, how many unused lines do we have? How old are our devices? When are these devices getting replaced? Are they getting replaced too early? Where are they sitting unused? Are they in a desk drawer somewhere? And really importantly, is there a dollar value attached to all of these things? Because the minute you get a dollar value beside unused lines or aging devices, that's when the opportunity becomes a lot clearer. So organizations are often much more motivated to act once they can actually see the numbers. Now, it's one thing to say, we probably have some unused lines, and it's quite another thing to say, here are the unused lines, here's what they cost, and here's what can be recovered from all of that. And it's definitely not only about cost, it's also about waste. So if a device is sitting unused, that is a missed opportunity. If a line is active but no longer needed, well, that's unnecessary spend. And if devices are being upgraded too early, that's both a financial and an environmental issue. So for organizations trying to do this themselves, the starting point can be taking inventory and creating a spreadsheet with How old is each device? Is the line active? Is the device still in use? Is it eligible for an upgrade? And has it been returned? The key is consistency. If device information is only updated every once in a while or only when there's a really big problem, it becomes super hard to make good, educated decisions. A greener life cycle starts with knowing what you have at all times. So then once you have that visibility, the next step is recovery. This is where organizations can often find very quick wins. Many organizations already own devices that they can use again. They just don't necessarily have them back. These are the phones that are hidden in desk drawers or never returned by previous hires. And this is where we encourage organizations to make the return process really easy. Now, at Valet, we build recovery into the normal business processes. When there's an upgrade or a repair or a departure, that's an opportunity to recapture the old device. For example, if we send a replacement device, we also then send a return box so that the old device has a clear path back. So that sounds really simple, but it really does matter. If there's no box or no return instructions and no waybill, there's no process, and devices do tend to disappear. And you can also create more targeted recovery initiatives. So, one example is having a device return day. And this idea is to create a really low pressure way for employees to return unused smartphones or tablets, whether or not they're working. So, this position is all about not necessarily blaming anyone for having a device in their drawer. It's more about saying, we know that devices accumulate and we just want to give them a responsible second life. So those devices can then be evaluated for reuse within the organization, potentially refreshed for future deployment, or responsibly processed if they truly can't be used again. Now, from a business perspective, this recovery really matters because every single device you get back is potential value. It can become inventory for your company, it can help avoid a new purchase, it definitely reduces waste, and it can potentially become part of a responsible end of life stream. So, don't assume all unused devices are gone. Make sure you're building a process to get them back. Now, the third step is extending device life, and this is one of the most important parts of the sustainability story. Before replacing a device, the question should be, can the life of this device be extended? So that can mean several different things. It can mean troubleshooting, it can mean repair, it might mean refreshing the device after it comes back. So that could be a new screen protector, a new battery installation. And sometimes a device gets put in a drawer because someone says it's broken or thinks it's broken, but the issue is actually something that support could fix. So it could be something even as simple as a software update. It might be the power cycling of the device, resetting a network issue. Maybe it's a service issue. If you're on iOS, it could be that, the iPhone or the iPad is showing an SOS signal, which does require a little bit more investigation. But in all of those cases, replacing the device right away, it might solve the immediate frustration that the user is having, but it's not the most sustainable or cost-effective decision. So that's really why troubleshooting matters. It extends the life of the device, but it also helps IT teams avoid those unnecessary replacements. Now, this isn't to say there isn't a time where a swap doesn't make sense. If a user needs to be up running really, really quickly, that downtime matters. And in many cases, the process is to swap the device so that the employee can keep working, which is totally fine. But from a life cycle perspective, that swap doesn't necessarily have to mean it's the end of the original device's life. The return device, make sure you're getting it back, just like in step 2, assess it, refresh it where possible, and then it can go into the company's inventory to be used again later. So if the device is captured and refreshed, it can continue to create value. So the ideal model is troubleshoot first, repair where possible, replace only when needed, and then refresh the return device so it can be redeployed. And that's how organizations can begin to extend the useful life of their fleet. And the really big message here is that not every broken device is necessarily broken, and not every aging device is ready to be retired or replaced. So the fourth step here is redeployment, and this is where kind of steps 1 through 3 start to come together. Once devices are returned and assessed, they definitely should not just sit in storage. They should become ready to be deployed in inventory. When a return device can still be used, the goal is to prepare them for future use and then use them within that customer's environment or your environment. So the green approach is having visibility, inventory, and a process so that you're able to redeploy quickly without unnecessary waste. So redeployment supports sustainability because it means that your devices can be in circulation for a lot longer. And it also supports cost control because every single redeployed device is one less device that you need to purchase. So from an IT perspective, it creates more control. Instead of scrambling every single time there's a new user or a broken device, you now have a pool of devices that have already been assessed and are completely ready to go. So the line I would leave you with here is that the next device you may need may already be in your inventory. So at this point, we've talked about what happens before the end of life with that visibility, recovery, troubleshooting, repair, refresh, redeploy. Now I want to pass it off to Jim, who's going to be talking about the end of life processes.
Thank you for that breakdown, Alexa. Definitely some actionable steps there. I think all organizations can take a look at. Very common. I think we get fixated a little bit on buying new devices that are exciting, how we deploy them, how we support them, and that type of thing. And it's not always as attractive to look at, okay, well, what are we going to do with the old devices? So my father's big, he likes the saying, plan your work and work your plan. And I think it just dovetails perfectly into that. Now, speaking of old devices, so let's say you do the 4 steps outlined by Alexa, and the decision is made that, okay, the assets are, we've used them, we've repaired them, we've redeployed them, we're ready to dispose of them, right? So, and I want to discuss kind of why we should, have second and third thoughts and really plan out this disposition path and making sure that we're doing it in a responsible manner. So it may sound very simplistic, but buying devices and creating devices, when we buy them, it's not free to produce them. And I put free in kind of, quotations just because I think we all understand that it isn't free, but you might not understand kind of some of the hidden impacts or value associated with those. So many of these devices contain precious metals, such as gold, silver, rare earth materials. The very common one that a lot of people know is the lithium, especially in the batteries. And so we understand that these materials are have a value and are hard to kind of extract from the earth, right? So just on that note too, like mobile devices also consume a significant amount of energy and water to mine those resources and assemble and produce the devices. I fact checked this stat this morning because I wanted to triple check that it was still accurate, but I don't think a lot of people know that it takes about 15 tons. That's tons with a T of water per smartphone to generate via extraction, production, assembly, and all those steps. Now, if you don't know how much that is to visualize, I looked it up. That's about 2 months worth of water for the average Canadian. So quite a significant amount of water being used per smartphone. So really cognizant of that. And I think whenever I share that stat with people, they kind of take a step back. And finally, the phones still have value and usefulness, utilization, right? So maybe your organization is done with them, but there's still many charities and other organizations that can use these devices. And there's still, remarketers and people that are looking for these devices to resell as well. So just jumping on to the next slide, please, Alexa. Now, things to look for when you're looking for like an IT asset disposition company or when you're sending in phones specifically, we always like to recommend these following steps. And they're pretty simple, but I think doing them all right really protects you and make sure that you're doing this in a responsible and sustainable manner. So using tools like an ABM, which is Apple Business Manager for iPhones or iPads, or an MDM, which is a mobile device manager, just to make sure that you're protecting the phones and managing the phones as they're, either transiting to the processing facility for disposition or moving between offices. A lot of organizations we see will actually factory reset the devices before sending them in just to make sure there's no corporate data on them. And then ensuring that any processing facility is using a known standard. I would say the most common one right now in our industry is the NIST 888 standard. If you want that riveting 90-page document, more than happy to send it over to you after the webinar. Just shoot me an email. Make sure whoever you're working with to process your assets is giving you an audit trail, right? So a wipe certificate or certificate of destruction to make sure that you can, track and audit that the devices after they've left have actually been wiped. Again, super simple stuff, but, making sure that you check these boxes when you're working with a partner. And then one thing that we don't see a ton of, which is getting more and more popular with ERP systems such as ServiceNow, is to use that wipe certificate or that certificate of destruction to make sure that the asset is then officially retired out of your organization. IT teams spend a lot of time chasing assets around, wondering which ones are still actually being used, which ones are not. And this is a great way to add a toe tag or a final bookend to make sure that, yes, okay, this asset's been wiped or disposed of, and here's the final wipe certificate that tells us we can now, ensure that it's not in our environment anymore. And then finally on this slide, work with a recycler or processor that is certified. One of the main ones in North America is the R2V3 certifications, ISO certifications. Just make sure that they are, getting randomly audited. They have these certifications to make sure that there's proper processes and policies in place with chain of custody, asset recycling, and asset management as well. So next slide, please. Awesome. And just kind of a quick summary slide for me. So a strong end to first life strategy should remove risk, headache, and create measurable value for you. Work with partners that can provide an auditable reporting process for you. Look for programs that can help support your sustainability goals. Here at Green4Good, we generate carbon credits with the assets that we send in, and ensure that your legacy assets are working for you and not the other way around. So try to make sure that you're not losing sleep over having old assets in your environment.
Awesome. Fantastic. Thank you so much, Jim. That was very informative. Great to have you on. So before we move into some questions that we have, I do really quickly want to highlight the take-home guide. So each of you will receive this guide in our thanks for attending this webinar today. And we created this because we don't want this learning series to just be a conversation that you listen to and then you forget about. We do really want to leave you with something practical that you can actually take back to your organization. So the guide summarizes the life cycle framework that we talked through today. It's got that visibility, recovery, extend, redeploy, and responsible end of life. It also includes a few simple actions that you can start with, like auditing unused devices, creating a return process, troubleshooting before approving replacements, and thinking about what a really strong ITAD partner should provide. Now, this guide is definitely not meant to be overwhelming. It's meant to be a starting point. So even if you only take one action from it, like perhaps centralizing device tracking or creating a clear return process, that is really a way that you can start to uncover savings and reduce waste. And ideally, this PDF will give you a way to bring this conversation back to your internal team. So we do have some time for some questions. Jim, I'd love to ask, what proof should we expect that data has been removed? This is something that you talked about, definitely expect proof from an organization that you're going into an ITAD partnership with. What does that proof look like?
Yeah, definitely more than just an email that says, yes, we erased the assets, trust us. Joking, of course. So common things that you want to find in a wipe certificate or a certificate of destruction will be, definitely the serial number or IMEI of the asset that you sent in. You'll want to have the method of erasure or wipe method that they used, to what standard. You'll also want to have, if that wipe was failed or successful, and definitely understand what the organization is going to do with the failed erasure if that happens. Did they physically destroy that? and make sure that it manages to call out the date. And some of them will even have like a digital signature on the report that if the report is tampered with, that digital signature will say, hey, somebody messed with the report and it's not authentic.
Right. Fantastic. And how old does a device need to be before it should be retired in an organization?
Good question. So I like short answers to questions. Unfortunately, this answer is a little bit, more political in nature that it kind of depends on a lot of factors. Budget, supply chain of new devices, what the devices are, who's using them, how they're using them. So I have a number of oil and gas customers. They are very hard on, especially the field technicians are very hard on their assets. So we tend to see them earlier on the life cycle, whereas maybe some other organizations are more gentle with them. But I think just typically we see anything from 4 to 6 years on the mobile aspect. Again, it really depends on kind of the asset and the deployment.
I would mirror the 4 to 6 life cycle. That's typically what we see here at Valet, with something like a construction industry leaning more to that four, and other organizations being able to squeeze 6 years out of them. So one question that's really popping out to me on this slide, and something that
Mm.
you mentioned very briefly, were carbon credits. So how can carbon credits fit into a mobile recycling program?
Yeah, interesting question. So um, I mentioned earlier that there's a quantifiable environmental impact associated with the creation of new devices. I mentioned 15 tons of water per smartphone. If we use the opposing logic, there must be a positive environmental impact of not producing that net new device, right? In reduction of demand of that net new device. So at Green4Good, we actually worked with an environmental firm to quantify our individual environmental impact of stopping someone from purchasing that net new device, and instead of utilizing instead of buying a new device, but utilizing a secondhand device, right? So what was the environmental impact of pushing someone more to a secondhand device or even a third-hand device? And using that kind of rationale, we actually generated a way to generate one carbon credit per device. Now, if you don't know what a carbon credit is or what the equivalency is, I kind of ran the numbers for us. But one carbon credit from us is equal to 1 ton of CO2 emissions. Now, if you think about your gas tank, so normally they're about 40 to 70 liters in size. If you're in Calgary like me, maybe a little bit skewing a little bit larger in size from that. But 1 ton of CO2 emissions is the same as consuming 431 liters of gasoline.
Wow.
So about 3 to 4 fill-ups of your tank, and just from another equivalency stat, close to the electricity emission of a single home for a year. So basically a large amount of energy in 1 ton of CO2 emissions. And again, using that opposing rationale, saying, okay, well, what if I used a secondhand device? What if I used the used device instead of increasing demand, instead of buying that net new smartphone that again uses a lot of energy and raw materials to generate?
100%. Well, thank you for providing those equivalencies. That really puts it into perspective. And
No
everyone,
problem.
please do give it up for Jim for attending today and giving the Green4Good level of things. It's fantastic to have you. So to close, I do really want to bring it all back to one main idea. The biggest opportunity is not always buying better or newer devices. Often it's managing the devices that you already have more effectively. So this is where something like a life cycle assessment can really help. This is a free and simple way for Valet Wireless and Green4Good to take a look at your organization's current mobile environment and help identify things like how many unused lines you have, the age of the devices in your fleet, where devices might be getting replaced too early, where unused assets may be recovered, and where there may be cost savings or value available through things like contract renegotiation, carrier optimization, and eliminating unused lines, and also an opportunity to talk about retiring your legacy tech through a really strong ITAD partner. So if today's session made you wonder what this could look like inside of your own organization, we are really, really happy to continue the conversation with you. You can reach out to me at Valet Wireless or Jim at Green4Good. I've got our emails dropped in the chat, and we can help you understand what a better life cycle process could look like for your organization. So thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate you being here, and feel free to reach out and contact us with any questions. Bye, everyone.
That was great. Thanks, everyone.